Sometimes, all I want to see is the complete story of a particular family in Crusader Kings 3. It can feel like every playthrough becomes this continuous growth of a dynasty with no end in sight for them, when the stark reality is that centuries-long-lived dynasties are pretty rare. One such dynasty was the de Normandie family, which ruled Normandy and later England. They started in the year 911, when Rollo de Normandie settled in Normandy as a vassal of the French king, and it ended in the year 1135, when the Anjou dynasty seized the kingdom during England's period of civil war called the Anarchy. What I've got for you today is a complete story about the de Normandies, starting with Rollo himself and ending with a dead dynasty. That being said, I will not be following the full course of history. My goals are to essentially go from the Norse adventurer Rollo to the Duke of Normandy and then to the King of England, and to, along the way, make some fun alternate histories where possible. Regardless, let's not dance around too much. Today I'll be taking Rollo de Normandie from mere nobody, just some Dane, to the founder of a great lineage. So, what does an ambitious Dane do when he wants to obtain something more than some frigid shrubland in the frozen north? He's got to get to work. Rollo here is looking to ingratiate himself to the more civilized world, but to get the resources to move southwest, he'll need to do some odd jobs around Denmark first. I'm aiming for the type of contracts which contribute to the Knight of the Swans decision, so I can try and get the Knight Errant trait. One such contract is the Rescue a Fair Subject scheme, which generates a relatively skilled character of a gender attractive to your character. Rollo rescued a fair maiden named Tora, and the two were wed right away. Other such contracts often involve dueling, but thankfully, Rollo is quite the duelist, and with each victory, a new patron is willing to offer some troops. The real money for a mercenary is to fight wars though, not to do errands. By April of 869, I ended up with a collection of Huscarls, Varangian veterans, and Coney, thanks to some lucky men-at-arms requests. I got some Vigmen at one point, but they suck, so I discarded them. It's time to cross the seas and leave behind Scandinavia. Rollo historically raided much of the land along the Seine, which is the river running from Normandy down to Paris and beyond, but being an unlanded adventurer, I can't raid. So instead, Rollo will be moving to England and working to build up more men-at-arms so he can make money fighting other people's wars. Along the way, his first daughter, Freydis, turned 3. She is currently the only child that Rollo's got, and so is his heir. Time will tell if a son will replace her. Upon arriving in East Anglia, Rollo immediately found some work for the famous Jarl Heston. You may have heard of him. He's made an excursion into England, but has found himself the target of Christian aggression. Naturally, Rollo would support his countrymen, but the odds were not looking good. The Welsh had amassed over 2,000 men to the combined Norse army of about 700. Nonetheless, if one Huscarl is worth, conservatively, 10 weak Christian men, then it could be considered a 3-to-1 advantage for Rollo, right? That logic would prove to be sound when in August, the Norse army soundly defeated the Welsh forces at Cheshire. Although it would take some time before the war ended, it would eventually end with a Norse victory, and with Rollo getting his first payment as a proper mercenary. All that excitement did of course wind down to the return to fighting random criminals for money. By the way, I just want to say that the Blademaster trait really should be more common. Rollo here has slain many a criminal in his time as an adventurer, and yet he is not even an aspiring Blademaster. How does that work? No matter. It's time to get more work as a mercenary. In August of 876, Rollo would face a king. He fought to help Count Adalbold against the King of Lotharingia, and his entry into the lowlands would see a demand for Norse mercenaries rise. Indeed, Rollo would show some greed when he joined another Christian, Count Gerulf, in war against Jarl Torsten, a fellow Scandinavian. Of course, historically, hiring Danes to fight Danes was pretty prevalent. Anyway, Rollo was able to defeat Torsten quite easily, but the King of Lotharingia was much tougher. He'd fight hard and occupy a lot of land along the Rhine, but a king's army would prove too great. It didn't really matter though. Rollo gets paid, win or lose, as a mercenary. The money from those contracts went into a lock wagon. Consider it an investment, as with a lock wagon, the leftover weapons and armor of the dead foes in the field could be collected and sold. Nonetheless, work dried up in England, so Rollo took his first trip to France. He didn't come as a raider, but as a contractor, arriving in Paris in February of 881. He had taken to some new work, which wasn't just about hunting down fugitives or keeping the peace. He did his first passage of arms, a matter of intimidation. He's getting a reputation. Where bandits hear that Rollo the Viking is near, apparently they won't even dare approach. An interesting reputation, as many had expected Rollo would turn to the usual heathen antics. So far, he's somehow becoming an upholder of law and order, even as a pagan. Nonetheless, many good Christians doubt Rollo's true intentions. The next couple of years were spent mostly just doing contract work, with Rollo paying attention to his daughter's upbringing. Freydis came of age in 884, while Rollo was away from camp on mercenary duty. She grew to be an exemplar, in many ways, of the image that her father projected, but not her father himself. Freydis couldn't often spend time with him, but but she heard of him and his exploits through the records of his work. She grew to be a bookkeeper, but that wouldn't keep her off the field. Immediately, she demonstrated enough prowess to earn a place in the shield wall with her father. Rollo initially didn't approve, but ultimately needed more skilled knights to keep up his mercenary work. Interestingly, Freydis' personality almost perfectly reflected her father's legendary status and would perpetuate it in kind. She may be a hardened mercenary warrior, but she's kind and just. She's almost, some might dare to say, Christ-like. On the other end of the issue is Freydis' sister, Skjaldvor. Although she's significantly stronger and bigger than her sister, she's a complete coward who hides in the pantry. She's something of a disappointment to both Rollo and his image, but he loves her all the same as his sheltered little bundle of joy. In the year 888, England's period of tumultuous war calmed down, mostly because the Saxons and Norse divided the land between themselves into what would become known as England and the Danelaw. Peace is good for everyone, except the mercenaries who thrive on war. Luckily, or perhaps unluckily, depending on how you look at it, Rollo came down with an illness shortly after the partition, meaning he'd have been ill-advised to fight in a war, even if there were any nearby to participate in. Skjaldvor came of age during this little break in work, becoming a master of the shadows. In truth, a coward might not do well in confrontation, but their effort at avoiding conflict can prove valuable in its own way. Skjaldvor encompasses pretty much the total opposite of her sister, and, in a Christian view, is exactly everything wrong with the heathens. Great strength, but neither wisdom nor heart to guide it. Regardless, by 889, Rollo recovered and found new conflicts to benefit from, off in Brittany, and even as far as Corsica. His name is spreading far and wide, and with all this service to the Christian world, Rollo entered the world of legend. He's still a heathen, but he's a shining example of how a heathen can escape their nature even without the Lord's guidance. He became known as a knight-errant, serving righteous lords and ladies to keep the peace and protect the world from banditry. Of course, the reality is that Rollo just liked how much it paid to serve the landed gentry of Western Europe. Nonetheless, it's an honorable and valuable thing to be a beloved knight. The free set of armor sure has value too. And yet, Rollo has had his eyes on greater achievements. To conquer and to rule, that would be the rightful place for a glorious knight, right? Well, it's easy to become known as some gallivanting knight, since it only benefits the powers that be to label some up-and-coming heathen as a great man, but when that knight comes knocking for power, things change. Becoming a conqueror is no simple task. Well, okay, it's actually pretty simple, but it just takes a while. Rollo will have to win some meaningful wars and amass an army of disciplined men alongside a vanguard of hardened knights. Rollo has, so far, been pretty interested in his own fate, but he's starting to really consider the future for his children too. He has 2 daughters and no sons. One daughter is an exemplary heir and the other a well-loved misfit. Skjaldvor would ultimately have her life taken care of when she approached her father during a trip through East Anglia. She had fallen in mutual love with Prince Einhir of East Anglia, and Rollo just couldn't say no to his little girl, now a woman. He allowed her to stay and find her own fate there, but stayed in contact through letters. He wasn't worried about her. If anything, Skjaldvor would thrive in a royal court where her intrigue would take her far. Nonetheless, he did threaten to return and summarily end the lives of the entire East Anglian royal court if she should ever be harmed. Prince Einhir and Rollow de Normandie were married in September of 891. With his second daughter taken care of, Rollo looked to his eldest daughter and heir, Freydis. She's a willful girl who didn't seem interested in marriage during her early 20s. She would be left to her own devices for some time, but Rollo asked her what kind of man she'd one day want. She replied that she'd like a great warrior like her father. A little creepy maybe, but I can't imagine that being the child of a legend makes life easy. It would take a few years, but when Freydis turned 29, she came to her father with a man in mind. A member of the Shield Wall, Ceolwulf, a Christian Saxon sure, but apparently the most impressive man that Freydis had so far met, and a more or less appropriate age. Well, if that's who she wants, that's who she'll get, as Rollo arranged for Freydis and Ceolwulf's marriage. The two got to work quickly, as just about a year later, in August of 899, Freydis gave birth to Gunhildr. Maybe one day, someone in this family will have a son. Meanwhile, by October of 901, Skjaldvor had given birth to 3 daughters and a son, all of whom will be raised as Saxon Christians, but with the blood of a powerful Norse lineage. Anyway, let's take a moment to reflect on the, shall we say, historicity of this run. Rollo was made Duke of Normandy in the year 911 historically, which means in theory, we've got about 10 years to achieve that before we're losing our attachment to history. But at the same time, we've already diverged so strongly from history with this knight in shining armor and diametrically opposed daughters narrative. Maybe the land that we call Normandy need not be so humble in nature. After many years of work to establish himself as a truly legendary warrior, Rollo's ambitions have begun to swell. He's tired of having no land to call home, even though he is welcome in any castle that he would bless with his presence. He's also tired of being seen as just some heathen. Life on the road is not usually meant to be a permanent arrangement, and yet Rollo has never held any land in his time. He'd be particularly attracted to retirement when he and his daughter Freydis suffered a disfiguring case of measles. They both survived, but were out of patience for this wandering life. With just a few more new recruits to his forces, Rollo assembled enough men with enough talent to proclaim himself no longer just a knight-errant. The legendary tales of chivalry following Rollo made people underestimate him. He arrived in Rouen, celebrated and loved, but with an announcement. There's no pretense here, there's no ceremony. He simply said that he has come to stake out a new kingdom, and that it would be wherever his sword lays waste to his enemies. Of course, the French King Rudolph would have an issue with this, and so war began, but everyone knew who was going to win. The once beautiful, chivalrous knight Rollo has returned without a face and without mercy. Many cities along the Seine were occupied and burned, while Rollo heard news of the king's forces mustering to the east. The unwitting little king would be captured and forced to surrender at Provence. So began the new Kingdom of France, based in Paris. Rollo is 70 years old at this time, but while he's still got some life left in him, he'll do everything he can to set up a kingdom for his daughters to inherit. The first section of land he needed to secure was the Seine Valley and the countryside that supports it. If only he were younger, he might have had more time to conquer all kinds of land, but in some ways, the mass chaos of France was somewhat favorable. What Christian lords did not swear their allegiance would be punished, and given that that was basically all of them, they left a lot of opportunities for such punishments. Unfortunately, while consolidating his kingdom, Rollo's daughter Freydis would pass away from the stresses of warfare. She had too kind a heart to let the death she and her battles were causing go without guilt, but at the very least, Rollo had a granddaughter to carry on his legacy. With the conquest of both Neustria and Flanders, this kingdom, known as France, would be renamed to Normandy to reflect the significant divergence in its cultural makeup. The land itself was quickly settled with Northmen from Scandinavia, following in Rollo's footsteps to establish a proper kingdom there, but conversions to Christianity among migrants were pretty much universal. Norman culture would be heavily influenced by Rollo's own story, but in particular, it would be influenced by the stories of his faceless daughter Freydis. Norman culture began adopting the warriors by merit tradition in the spirit of the shield maiden that helped establish Rollo's legend. Anyway, with only a little life left, Rollo put his army to work. You see, he has a still living daughter, and indeed he's even got a surprise third daughter by his new wife after Tora passed away. The Valley of Valois will be the royal domain to go to Gunhild alongside the kingdom itself. The Duchy of Flanders will go to the infant Kundo as a vassal of Normandy, but for Rollo's precious Skjaldvor, only a kingdom will do. In just 6 months' time total, Rollo sailed from the mouth of the Seine to Winchester and captured King Cerdic, which would bring the entire Kingdom of England into the Kingdom of Normandy. Now look, I know that Rollo didn't do all this stuff historically, but let's just say it's within the possibilities and stretch history a little bit. Besides, if you're an experienced CK3 player, you know that kingdoms like this, which are composed of a tapestry of wrong culture, wrong faith vassals, they never stick around, mostly because of civil war. That civil war did come pretty shortly after, with all the Anglo-Saxons rising up to fight off their Norman overlords. Now that is historical, is it not? It was pretty anticlimactic because Rollo caught the leader of the rebellion almost immediately and thus ended the entire war. The Saxon dukes and earls that rose up had their land revoked, including the lords of East Anglia, who had been connected to the de Normandis by marriage. Nonetheless, the House of East Anglia would get their comeuppance thanks to that marriage. It's not certain how, but Skjaldvor, during the chaos of the Saxon uprising, was mysteriously found dead with no culprit in sight. It was sad for the whole realm, given just how wholesome that girl had been, but it put into question the entire conquest of England. The kingdom will pass on to Eanswyth, Rollo's granddaughter by Skjaldvor, which would put an Anglo-Saxon queen in charge of a land that was once filled with Saxons, but is now filled with Normans. After all, Rollo just revoked the Saxons' land and replaced them with Normans. Regardless, it's beyond him. He wants to point fingers and find who to blame for his daughter's death, but shortly after England was conquered, so too was Rollo, conquered by death. He left behind the Kingdom of Normandy to his granddaughter Gunhild, the Duchy of Flanders to his newborn daughter Kundo, and the Kingdom of England to his Saxon granddaughter Eanswyth. You might think this would lead to war for Gunhild, who will seek to reclaim the English throne, but here's the thing. Rollo had the advantage of an army that fought for him for glory. When Gunhild came to the throne of Normandy, the armies which had sworn their lives to Rollo suddenly cared a whole lot more about their wages, which the new queen could not provide very easily. For this reason, she'd end up in a constant cycle of raids across France. Using a combination of prisoner ransoms and actual loot from the land, Gunhild found herself consistently just a little bit in debt, but only rarely actually out of it. If she shrinks the army, she'll be vulnerable, but they're eating into all the money that this kingdom simply does not have. Then, a new idea clicked. The former Kingdom of France has got a bunch of animal pelts and random banners that can be sold off. Indeed, these Christian kings love to display wastes of wealth. It's not a big treasure trove by any means, but it's enough to upgrade a legend and therefore justify completing it. That's one more expense gone, and that's also an opportunity. As expected, in December of 926, England, under Queen Eanswyth of East Anglia, has fallen into total civil war. The truth is, Normandy just isn't particularly rich, and it's feeling like maybe Gunhild needs an escape from this tumultuous land. She's not quite ready to take the Normans across the seas, not with this immense economic ruin looming over her at every moment. Gunhild was thinking about trying to help her aunt, Kundo, get on the throne, but the two girls don't really get along. Had relations been a bit better, maybe the two could have jointly ruled the two kingdoms, but given the opportunity presented by a legendary adventure, maybe some strategic marriages would be more appropriate. In Ireland, a descendant line of Halfdan Whiteshirt has come to power, presenting a great alliance opportunity. At the same time, Gunhild's son, Holmgir, was betrothed to Rikiza of Jylland. With some alliances, Normandy can rest a bit easier, and potentially, these marriages could become pivotal in securing control over those realms overseas. That's getting a bit ambitious though, considering the crown can barely afford to pay for a ship to send the kids off for marriage. By the year 940, the Norman deficit was finally coming to an end. The kingdom had shrunk after some unfortunate inheritances to the rising kingdom of Aquitaine, but with the loss of some land came mostly a sense that only dead weight was lost. With a positive income and continued raids, Gunhild spent the next half-decade or so just stockpiling money to bring some stability to her kingdom. By 946, that lack of deficit created enough of a war chest that the dream of a new land felt achievable. The Kingdom of England, although war-torn right now, is rich. With a powerful Norman lord to lead the peasants, there could be some real prosperity there. It's time to move on from this little kingdom. Maybe Kundo can rule it instead. The war in England began with an immediate occupation of Winchester and Wiltshire, which would hopefully bait out a response. The Queen of England, of course, had to do something, and she did try, but once she got to Wiltshire, Gunhild sent her men back there to handle it. It was a total slaughter, with the Saxons littering the field dead. With a few more occupations in Somerset and Berkshire, the war came to an end, and complete chaos ensued, as every strip of land was revoked and claimed by whoever could get there first. When an entire kingdom collapses to be replaced by a new one, there's always chaos. There will always be land grabs and opportunism. In some cases, the types of lords you'd expect would come to power, from a well-respected but low-born knight to a spoiled son of a lord. Sometimes, though, interesting new lords can come to power. A guest of the court, Tuznuk Ashina, a Khazar Jew from Far East, has somehow made his way all the way over here and successfully claimed East Anglia for himself and his people. While it might seem like Gunhild wouldn't want some strange foreigners ruling her land, there was opportunity that Jewish lords could provide. That, and sometimes foreign lords, could be useful in keeping the peasants down. After all, Gunhild had no intention of doing anything beyond exploiting her subjects, but Tuznuk was interested in settling East Anglia with his own people. That would surely lead to some cultural clashes, which might give a convenient scapegoat for Norman rulership. Of course, it's just a haze. If anything, Gunhild and Tuznuk had an unwritten agreement that the queen would occasionally punish the Ashina clan for their overreaching settlers, and in return, a majority of the settlements would go unnoticed. Through that arrangement, the Norman queen could use her pressure on the Khazars to look like an Anglo-Saxon hero, sort of. In the north, Gunhild appointed her son, Holmgir, to rule York, thinking it would be good practice. The rugged cold up there felt fitting for the hardy berserker. Finally, true riches have come to the coffers, and England has become a new home for the Normans. Of course, immediately, raids would be conducted down the Seine, which Gunhild once called home, and that money would be reinvested into sponsoring craftsmen and adventurers where possible. One such adventurer, Elise, came home from the Middle East carrying the Ark of the Covenant, a box with some rocks in it as far as Gunhild cares, although many of the Christians, and especially the Khazar Jews of the realm, felt this was a truly immense treasure. It would sit in the court, collecting dust. Next up would be a crown and a royal scepter, but not before, through fate, all the Hvitserk children, except the now king Ottar, have passed away. Conveniently, Ottar is married matrilineally to Gunhild's daughter, and they've already got a son between them. Little Bohemond might one day be king of Ireland to match his grandmother's Kingdom of England. After taking Bohemond into her tutelage, Gunhild was also presented with a beautifully made crown. It would be inlaid with a piece of one of the Covenant tablets, which many thought was impossible. It's said that who opens the Ark would be killed by God. This would convince everyone that the ark in the courtroom was a fake, but the idea of a crown containing one of the most foundational Abrahamic artifacts certainly was too appealing to ignore. The diadem of the covenant became a symbol of de Normandie rule in England. A lot of the Christians in the realm didn't take too kindly to that blasphemy, and so the first major rebellion rose up in unity over the issue. But peasants are just way too weak to really achieve anything. They'd need noble support to pull it off, but all the lords are either Norman or otherwise foreigners in these local cultural issues. The rebels were defeated and made into examples so that no one else will rebel for at least some time. Unfortunately, the outbreak of typhus across England would be the true rage of the land, as it claimed many lives, Saxon and Norman alike, but it didn't take the queen, despite her advanced age. Many thought that would be the end of her, including Gunhild herself, but she was lucky enough to be given a bit longer on Earth. The plague did a good job, though, of thinning out some of the Saxons, and because of that, the county of Cambridgeshire finally became a majority Khazar county after all those imported Turks outnumbered the locals. To reflect the changing identity of East Anglia, it was officially renamed in the Norman records to Turkestan, although later I realized a name like maybe Azaristan might have been better, since these are Khazars specifically, but oh well. In the meantime, little Bohemond inherited Ireland and immediately had his reign contested by just about everyone, so Gunhild rode in, ready to save him. A similar scenario was brewing in Denmark, where, just like with the Hvitserk kids, the various members of the Yeland family were mysteriously dying. Another throne secured, in a way, as once the king of Denmark was deposed for his tyranny, the king that took his place, Ogmund, was married matrilineally to another of Gunhild's daughters. To help secure control over Scandinavia and to punish the Christian converts there for desecrating the Temple of Uppsala, Gunhild invaded Stockholm and conquered it. She turned the entire duchy there into another grant for her sons, giving it out to her second-born son, who was also serving as the archpriest of England. By giving those counties out to a theocratic lord, this would make that region into a theocratic little duchy, which I wasn't intending to do, but which kind of makes sense. Anyway, by this point, Gunhild is coming up on her 30th anniversary as Queen of England, which means she's just about 70 years old, and everyone knows that the succession will be quite chaotic. The problem with such a long-lived queen is that her children are also quite old. Her firstborn and heir, Prince Holmgir of York, is already in his 40s, and once he inherits, it's likely he won't rule as long as his mother. A warrior lives a fuller, perhaps, but shorter definitely, life than a sheltered queen. Especially as a berserker, even Holmgir himself can feel his heart having trouble keeping up into his advanced age. Gunhild caught a plague in 976 and decided that if she's gonna die, it'll be with one more accomplishment under her belt. She started an invasion of Alba and made her son promise to see it through. As her men entered the Alban borderlands, she passed away, leaving the throne to Holmgir, who is quite the king, if only he weren't so old. The doubts over Holmgir's health were swept aside for now, with the priority on defeating Alba coming first. No one doubted that England would win this encounter, but reducing casualties where possible would be wise to stop some potential civil wars. The deal that Gunhild had with the Khazars continued under Holmgir as more and more Turks settled in Turkestan alongside some Normans in York. Holmgir had encouraged the settlement of proper Norman folks in the north to help keep his land under control and recruit more suitable men for the army. The Saxons often weren't as disciplined or loyal in combat as the Normans. Looking back north, the Albans put up a strong fight, but once their capital and its outskirts were occupied, they surrendered their kingdom to their superiors. A lot of the Highlander Gaels stayed in power locally, but were surrounded by Norman lords and put under Norman dukes. The Alban royal family was exiled to Wales and Ireland, where they will eventually be ousted, but now were secure. While attending university after the war, Holmgir heard news of a great new empire on continental Europe. The Holy Roman Empire has filled in the power vacuum left by Gunhild when she abandoned Normandy, but it's a troubled empire right off the bat. Directly to their east, there are Slavic pagans knocking on the door and raiding constantly, while in the west, many lords have chosen to go their own way and might need to be conquered or otherwise convinced to fall in line. Nonetheless, the loot acquired in the Alba campaign and from various raids over time was reinvested into a great legend connecting Holmgir's lineage to the Trojans. As sailors from overseas with mysterious ancestry, it's easy for the descendants of Norsemen to justify strange connections like this. After all, who knows where Rollo really came from, and the Norse gods? Perhaps those are just Greek gods, right? Apparently, the Irish branch of the de Normandie family had been deposed during the invasion of Alba, and so Holmgir invited his nephew, also named Holmgir, to the court, and quickly propped him up as the new king of Ireland. It's important that the entirety of the British Isles be securely in Norman hands. From here, rule over England mostly consisted of putting down the occasional peasant rebellion, sailing overseas to support the Irish and Danish branches of the family, and observing the world, really. His kingdom almost feels invincible, but when the Christian Crusaders destroyed the Roman Empire out east, it became clear that no realm, no matter its prestige and power, is immune to destruction. The Latin Empire, as Holmgir saw it in 986, is the result of a unified Catholic army, and it is indeed powerful. Curious that they would put in power and end illusion, but if that's their choice, it's their choice. Even the Khazars took advantage of the chaos and conquered some pieces of Pontus, which would make the settlers of Turkestan quite happy. It became clear to Holmgir that if he wants to make his realm even stronger, he'll have to at least some extent, embrace his people. In 988, he learned English and integrated the Anglo-Saxon culture into his Norman culture to create what we now call English culture. It'll take some time before this new hybrid culture comes to dominate England, but it will eventually. To help ease it along, Holmgir encouraged policies of cultural blending where possible, so that his people would be encouraged to mingle and mix. Indeed, to help even further with cultural integration, Holmgir began a tour of the entire realm, emphasizing cultural festivals. He would tour especially in Alba to try and settle the Gaels down. They are fierce warriors compared to the Saxons, who are more used to farming. The trip would be long, and see the king enjoying the festivities of various cultures and putting out an olive branch to his subjects. If the people are willing to accept him, he will treat them well, which is quite different from the sense of cold rulership that Gunhild and her Norman culture brought to the table. Holmgir celebrated a successful cultural campaign with a military one in 998 against Wales. The Welsh were almost impossible to uproot from their castles, so although King Holmgir is indeed now King of England and Wales, the Welsh are in reality quite autonomous. While celebrating his new kingdom and the last new year of the 10th century, Holmgir started choking on some food, and it looked like he might not be able to get whatever hunk of food was stuck in his windpipe out. He did eventually cough it up and almost fall unconscious from the effort, but this was very clearly a sign that his time was coming. Some say his mind changed after it lacked access to air for that long, as a few months later, Holmgir began another cultural revolution for the English. He was worried that he'd gone too far in accepting so much Saxon culture, and so tried to Normanize the English culture. This would begin by reintroducing the audacious cadets tradition, which saw the return of heavy cavalry to the ever-increasing lines of longbowmen in the army. The combination of English longbows and Norman écuyers felt like it might be completely invincible, although there remains a question of who to use this immense army against. Holmgir's judgment was called into question when he put the realm into massive debt to entirely remodel his castle in Middlesex. The humble Anglo-Norman fortress it was built as at first would become a proper Franco-Norman castle, modeled after the castles in Paris. He ended up recovering the economy relatively quickly with some raids, but it was a risky move to pay for something with money that he didn't have. Holmgir even allowed further Norman settlement into the kingdom when, in June of 1001, the county of Kent would become a proper entrepot of Norman culture, goods, and people into the kingdom. Not everyone would take so kindly to these sweeping Norman reforms, though, as a civil war broke out about a year later. If anything, it's an opportunity to revoke more land from the local Welsh and Gaelic lords, though, as the aforementioned longbow and cavalry combo is quite unbeatable. Holmgir was nearly done the war when he lost a battle of his own. He lost the battle to death and passed away in February of 1004, leaving the throne to his son Oswin. His other sons would inherit Alba and Wales, but Oswin himself is already in his 50s. No one expected that Holmgir would live to be 73, but Oswin is neither as competent nor as enduring as his father. The death of Holmgir would begin what most considered to be the end of England's dominant position in Europe. Almost immediately, Wales returned to the crown when the child there was deposed. His only heir was his older brother Oswin, who we've already discussed, so England and Wales were united, but Alba remained an independent kingdom, which the English king worked to keep in his family's hands. The lords there saw their moment for freedom and went for it, but with the might of England coming down on them, they had no chance. Unfortunately, the distraction that the war in Alba brought let more disgruntled nobles in England rise up, and so Oswin's rulership so far has been completely embroiled in war. He couldn't take the pressure, and so he died of stress after just 3 years of rulership, leaving his young but entirely unfit son Nigel to rule. Nigel is not completely without a mind or competence, but he's just not the brave exemplar of the Normandy ethics that his ancestors were. Nigel is a very laissez-faire king with no real ambition. He's also completely paranoid and so rarely sees his lords in person. He's especially considered a coward for his role in the murder of his own brother, who he killed in 1010 only because he heard mere rumors that the boy from Kent was looking to overthrow him. Others say he did it to inherit the duchy back, which he felt he deserved. Regardless, a kinslaying, immature boy on the throne did not exactly restore faith in the crown. It was in this time that the Catholics saw their chance. They declared their intention to crusade to England and reclaim the holy site of Canterbury and the Ark of the Covenant. Before King Nigel could even prepare for it, though, he was taken by a plague at the age of 25. Now the realm is truly screwed. King Sigurd took the throne at 4 years old and had to split the domain with his siblings, putting the kingdom into a very vulnerable position for the upcoming crusade. To relate this back to history, this can, I guess, be compared to the English anarchy, where the House de Normandie was overthrown in civil war by Henry Curtmantle and the Anjou dynasty, which you can play as in the 1178 start date, by the way. With that said, I suppose I've spoiled that, yeah, this kingdom is screwed against a crusade. Maybe if I had been playing a more competent and adult ruler, I'd have a chance, but there's absolutely no chance of victory here. Initially, as small Crusader armies landed in the east of the kingdom, King Sigurd won a few battles here and there, but those distractions only made it possible for the larger Crusader forces to land uncontested, and once they did, they were sure to win. In November of 1013, a massive force of Winchester seemed like it could be challenged, so Sigurd went for it, but this army was led by the Duchess of Normandy, ironically, and she was a tactical master. She completely outwitted the English army, and with help from the other Crusaders, wiped the floor with Sigurd's forces. That defeat marked the end of England in spirit, really, as the Crusaders came crashing down upon London. There's no use in going down without a little more of a fight, though. The English army and its allies made one last attempt to win a battle outside London. At the Battle of Hertfordshire, an attempt was made, but a futile one. The Crusaders piled in and won again. London was open, and when it fell in April of 1016, England was conquered. The de Normandie lineage was removed from England, and of course, because it's a paradox game, it bugged out and I was playing an unlanded kid with no adventuring camp. In theory, I could swap characters over to maybe Scotland or something, but King Peter's in a coma, and probably not long for this world. There's Oswin II of Wales, but he's got less than 100 men to his name, and the truth is that the de Normandie family has been defeated, and will fade into obscurity, as would happen to them in history. Sadly, this also means the Khazars of East Anglia will likely disappear one day too. The head of the Ashina family is an Anglo-Saxon Khazarite named Edhelziga, by the way, which I just think is really funny. Anyway, this has been the first entry in the new GIGACHAD format, the GIGACHAD Run, where I focus on a more short-term, complete playthrough with a slightly less emphasized story. We'll see how it evolves over time. Let me know what you think, and as always, thank you for your time.